The video is to highlight the government intervention of subsidies in preventing or reducing market failure. So, to begin with, what is a subsidy? Well, it's a financial assistance provided by a government to a specific industry, business, or individual, and usually in the form of cash payments. So, its aim is to encourage production and/or consumption of a certain good or service. So, let's take housing. In recent times, how has the government subsidised the supply of housing? Well, one example was the 2013 Help to Buy scheme. It provided first time buyers financial assistance, and the reason why this was needed was because the UK housing market, even today, is characterised by a lack of affordable housing. So, when we consider it being an inefficient allocation of resources, consider the externalities involved. Housing supply avoids crowding, homelessness, and substandard living conditions. So, with this availability of new houses, it's going to have a positive spillover effect. The scheme was designed for better information, ensuring first-time buyers that lacked that experience of buying a house was given information and guidance such as the property value. Um, it clearly lends itself to mobility with greater supply of housing. House prices should be more affordable, meaning geographic immobility is reduced where people can afford to move locations for work. And again, with it being more affordable, it allows individuals on the property ladder, providing them an asset. Or we could consider public transport. So if we consider the Bus Service Operators Grant, providing funding support to bus services, not just public but also private sector, more people using buses, less cars required, less congestion and air pollution. It ensures competition as all independent operators are eligible, and again supports reducing inequality and immobility via making making transport affordable even in less profitable areas. Or there's prescriptions. So there's prescriptions as part of the NHS, full subsidies in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but in England it's been subsidised to a flat rate of £9.35 with exemptions such as for pregnant women, babies, etc. Now the charge have been set at a level in England which they believe helps generate revenue for the NHS. But without causing excessive costs for medication. So making it affordable. And if it wasn't made affordable, you can imagine it would be undervalued and therefore underconsumed. And considering the impacts this medication has, so in terms of avoiding hospitalisation and therefore reducing long-term healthcare costs, but also breaking down financial barriers to supporting good health, so the ability to work and earn income. So what diagrams could we draw? Well, firstly, let's just consider a basic diagram of a subsidy. So let's think about the journey and not just the end result of a supply shift. So if we're at Q1P1, the market equilibrium, but clearly the government does not believe this is an efficient allocation and wants greater quantity, so let's say at Q2. So how can they do that? Well, they need to encourage the producer. So how do they do that? Well, they make sure that they receive more than P1 per unit. So let's call that PC. PC, as this will not be the market clearing price, but it will be the price the supplier receives, which contribute towards their costs of production. We also need to encourage the consumer. So it's clearly they will not demand at that quantity at PC or at P1, so it'll have to be cheaper to extend demand. So let's say P2. Now, the market clearing price has changed, but it's caused by an external factor, the economic agent of the government. So what we do is we shift the supply curve to illustrate that the supplier can afford to charge P2 as they in fact will receive PC, with the government contributing towards the cost at the difference of P2 to PC as subsidy per unit. Now the entire cost of the subsidy is highlighted in blue. So now let's take this diagram a step further. And let's consider the consumer and producer surplus. Now clearly, if producers are receiving more, consumers are paying less, their surplus will rise. So the consumer surplus can be seen in green, which is larger than it was, as previously highlighted in black, that's the gain. The producer surplus is in purple, so that's grown again by what you can see in black, which is obviously the gain of producer surplus. So in total, the black now sees the welfare gained by both the consumer and the producer. But we do notice a triangle which doesn't seem to show a gain, but it's still costing the government. So of course, it shows the cost before, but that the red triangle highlights the cost which does not result in any gain, demonstrating inefficiency. So inefficiency such as, well, perhaps an opportunity cost. Where could these resources have been allocated to instead? I mean, there's other examples of government failure, but this video is focusing on solving market failure, so that'll be another video. So let's have a look at another example. Now, I've been reading the news today and seeing a budget policy for March 2023 of additional childcare support, now potentially giving 1 and 2 year olds the 30-hour free childcare, which 3-year-olds get. So, how do we show this via a diagram? Well, to begin with, we can say that the marginal social benefits are greater than the marginal private benefits. Think about how it helps labour participation, helps the development of our younger generations, but the cost of childcare in terms of child to staff ratio, increase in energy bills, food prices, they are only going to offer places where marginal private benefit equals marginal private cost, which is the free market allocation. So that highlights the deadweight loss as seen in the red triangle, illustrating partial market failure as there is some allocation of childcare, but not enough. So what can the government do? Well, they can subsidise. Covering the cost of those 30 hours will encourage production and consumption of childcare, so shifting the marginal private cost, and now we have a new equilibrium, which is actually the socially efficient allocation of resources at Q2. Now, the last diagram is based on what I've been currently marking for my class mocks. So I'm marking an exam paper at the moment, which is based on the airline industry. And the aim is to make it greener. So the aerospace sector deal, a little bit more complicated than just a subsidy. It's a relationship, a long-term one. However, of course, it includes financial support, so it's still relevant. Now, the aim is to reduce carbon emissions by 50% in the sector by 2050. It helps reduce regional inequality by creating jobs outside the more prosperous areas, such as London and the southwest. And it's designed to support apprenticeships and train workers developing their skills. So the aviation industry accounts for about 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gases emissions. So we could definitely argue that it has negative externalities in consumption. Now, the reason I say consumption is, consider one aircraft. The production of one aircraft is one time event, but the consumption of that aircraft is ongoing. Now, every time it flies, there's CO2, there's nitrogen oxide, and particulate matters being emitted. So why would we want to subsidise it? Well, the idea is to help them create new technology which are more socially efficient. So the subsidy helps reduce the marginal private cost, freeing up funds for R&D, and the effectiveness causes the new greener, more fuel efficient to be produced, replacing the older aircraft, but at the greater quantity wanted at Q3. So what we see is marginal social benefit shifts to marginal private benefit equals marginal social benefit 2, but obviously the marginal social cost equals marginal private cost also falls, as we see that the private cost related to the subsidy helps to reduce it.